Hello there, my name's Dr. Maitland Hislop and welcome to the second in my series of videos on resilience and hardening. This second video was due to be about personal characteristics, but I've stepped out of line a little bit because over the last week or so there's been much comment in the press and media about resilience in both the United States of America and also within the United Kingdom. So this video is about the threats to resilience and the threats to the United Kingdom. I mean, COVID caught the UK napping badly, and as we look back we see that Sir Mark Sidwell, who was the last Cabinet Secretary under the direction of both Prime Ministers May and Johnson, diverted resources away from planning for a pandemic to Brexit. So to a certain extent Brexit is responsible for some of the lack of COVID-19 planning. In 2018, myself and others challenged Public Health England around the number one risk to the United Kingdom at that time, which they believed was flu and or a pandemic, and we asked them what they were doing about it. We didn't have a very substantive response, which reflected the dissonance within the United Kingdom government about what threats were to be addressed how in the national risk profile. Threats have changed over the last 12 years in particular, since the crash of 2008. And the threats have changed in a myriad of ways, but let's just comment on a few of them. So we've had the financial crisis, we've had Brexit, we've had a Syrian war which has brought Russia much more into the Mediterranean, we've had the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, we've had issues in the South China Sea, we've had the Arab Spring, we've had Trump, and of course we've had a pandemic. So there's been a whole series of new threats appear since 2008. Critically in that period, China has changed its strategic approach, particularly to the West. It realised that the West was in a technology trap in terms of its military hardware, so the West was developing more and more and expensive technology and weapons. The Chinese realised that nobody would be able to sustain these sorts of expensive weapons over the long term, so looked for a different solution. Its different solution appeared in a book called Unrestricted Warfare by Xiangsui and Xiangsui. This was actually published in the late 90s and became Chinese doctrine at the turn of the millennium and somewhat later. Key points about this strategy was that the military option was not going to be the only option to waging war. Cyber weapons were to be used, space weapons were to be used, increased penetration of international organisations, a diplomatic offensive, use of finance, not only in the Belt and Road Initiative but elsewhere, and of course an increasing expansionism both to the east, the north, the west, and of course into the South China Sea. So China's whole approach to waging war and extending its influence changed as a result of this perception that nobody could really keep up this arms race on expensive technology forever. That's an important point because it bears on almost everything that we have to say as we go forward. To a certain extent this approach was mirrored by Russia. Russia particularly launched increased cyber attacks, and we've seen the effect of that on the United States in recent weeks, and so far we seem to have been lucky to evade such a catastrophic event, and let us hope that GCHQ and our cybersecurity teams are up to the job. They do seem to have had some success along with our security services. If we turn to the formal planning for resilience and threat management in the United Kingdom, we come up against a couple of problems. The first is it's a very disorganised and disparate environment, and the second is it's out of date. The average age of the planning documents and the strategic documents in the UK regarding resilience and threat management is 10 years. That's skewed a little bit to one side by the Civil Contingencies Act of 2004 and slightly to the other side by the COVID-19 recovery plan, which is only a few months old. Now, bear with me, I'm just going to list these documents. The first is the Joint Doctrine of the United Kingdom. The second is the Defence Strategy. The third is the National Security Strategy. The fourth, the International Defence Engagement Strategy. The fifth, the Global Strategic Threats. The sixth, the Cyber Security Strategy. The seventh, the Emergency Preparedness Plan. The eighth, the Civil Contingencies Act. The ninth, the National Recovery Plan. And the 10th, the COVID-19 Recovery Strategy, which is only a few months old but overtaken already by events. So those 10 documents basically describe how this country manages threats and resilience. They're all out of date. The dissonance within them is perhaps best reflected by a comment in the Defence Strategy that the duty of the United Kingdom government is to protect its citizens at home and abroad, whereas, as we've seen recently, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office has received legal advice to say that they don't have to look after our citizens abroad. And this is in response to the holding of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe in an Iranian prison, held hostage. So there's a great deal of confusion within these documents, and they need not only reducing in number, preferably to a national strategic doctrine and defence strategy which encompasses resilience, but they also need to sort out some of the conflicting issues within them. So although the UK was well prepared for the 2009-2011 flu pandemic and the potential of a SARS pandemic following it, it's not really too well prepared now, and of course we've seen the consequence of that, best demonstrated by the fact that Australia has had 1,000 deaths and we've had nearly 100,000 deaths. That's a significant statistic in terms of resilience. And as we've seen, we challenged PHE, Public Health England, in 2018 about its preparedness for a similar event to 2009-11, and we've received a very equivocal response. At a regional level, we have the local resilience fora, and these came into existence after the Civil Contingencies Act of 2004. But along with our world-class experts in resilience, in disaster and development studies, in logistics, they haven't been deployed regionally and locally to help with this current pandemic. And it's along with many other existing organisations, from the Cabinet Office all the way down to the local public health officials, who've not been properly engaged in addressing and administering the response to this pandemic. At a personal level, resilience has also declined. We've seen that in terms of how children are responding to this pandemic. Not only are they given no encouragement by their parents or school in how to be resilient, but the subjects they're taught at school are way out of date, maybe 50 years out of date, and they have no modern tools, personal computers, to help them get through it. In 2000, the Blair government at the time were committed to giving every child a personal computer by 2005. Now we are 15 years later and there's been no advance, and the government's IT targets were basically removed as a consequence of the austerity plan under the Cameron and government and the coalition. So we have become even more unprepared for what we're seeing now than we might have been had we followed through on the IT strategy, national IT strategy, in the year 2000. Fully functioning adults are having a problem, particularly a mental health problem, which calls into question their resilience capability as well. And of course none of them have been prepared for this. So unlike the much vaunted Second World War individuals, much praised by this current government, and to quote yet again Chris Donnelly of the Institute for Statecraft, we've had a 70-year holiday from reality, and within that period of time the resilience of individuals, particularly children, has diminished. So we've been hit by a number of additional issues over national resilience. The first one is obviously Brexit. The second one is possibly environmental, because along with many other cuts, the environmental resilience of this country has been diminished by the austerity programme to the extent that we get sewage into rivers. Our rivers are not properly managed. Forestry Commission has also had major cuts, so we're not managing our forests properly, etc. The same unfortunately goes for law and order. Law and order in this country is a mess, and justice denied is of course justice lost. And within a democracy, if there is not support for the law and order system, which there is not at the moment, particularly among those who are less fortunate in our community, then democracy itself becomes a threat. The law and order system in this country is not currently resilient, whether that's the minor courts, the major courts, the prison system, even the police force. Supreme Court probably is resilient and does its job. So with all that as a background, COVID presents an opportunity to sort this out, because we're clearly going to have to save some money. So one of the best ways to do that is to reform a number of the institutions so that they perform better in the future. And the good candidates for that are the National Health Service, ICUs notwithstanding. The whole thing is a mess and needs complete reform, preferably into integrated care organisations looking after specific localities. The police, the fire and the ambulance all need some form of reform to bring them into the modern age. And along with that come the courts, the law and order system, the environmental agencies, all the major state organisations could do with some sort of reform to slim them down, give them better strategies and save money. At a local level, we're all going to be expected to pay more council tax. I view that as unfair, because we have not voted to allow these local authorities to accumulate so much debt. They don't manage themselves properly, and that's quite clear from sending 2 or 3 buses, for example, to pick up 1 or 2 children. In the current environment, they really don't know what they're doing. They have no proper logistical planning, so they also need to be challenged. And so COVID should be taken as an opportunity to try and reform many of these organisations. So that's the opportunity. The danger is that we've already lost a war that we didn't even know we were in. So if we take my comments on China and we roll those with the current difficulties of resilience in this country, and we haven't really commented on the state of the armed forces, which is a completely different debate. I mean, for example, it's ridiculous that we're running 2 aircraft carriers but can't afford the Royal Naval Reserve. That really is a ridiculous situation. But we haven't really commented on the armed forces. But the fact of the matter is, China is running with an agenda which is not just about military offences and offensives. It's about taking over things without necessarily deploying the military. And we may already have lost that battle. But in the meantime, we have an opportunity to regroup and refocus, and we should take that at a planning level, strategic planning level, nationally, whilst COVID is still a problem, so that we come out the other end better than we went in. So I thank you very much indeed for watching. You can subscribe to my channel below. The next video will be on personal characteristics. Stay safe, and thanks again for watching. Goodbye now.